Psychopaths, narcissists and karma. Welcome to you. I wanted to share with you some thoughts I've had on psychopaths and narcissists. As always, I need to tell you, these are very personal thoughts. You know, they're very personal indeed, and you can take them or leave them. I'm just sharing them with you. However, what I should explain is that certainly my mother is on the narcissist spectrum. And I hypothesise that this is why I've grown up a super empath. Now, I should also tell you, anybody who tells you they're a super empath isn't one. So that's sort of saying that I'm not, but I've had to tell you because of it explains things so well. So, yeah, it's something I've come to realise. And it's probably, almost certainly, the reason why I got into a relationship with a psychopath who's also a covert narcissist, and had a child with her and endured 20 years of the most incredibly abusive relationship imaginable. Now, I'm only telling you those things about me so that you understand where I'm coming from. I'm not trying to pull rank and say I know what I'm talking about, because of, you know, many of us go through life and experiences and don't really understand them. So I'm not trying to say that. But what I am saying is, well, you know, this isn't plucked out of thin air. It is coming from somewhere at least. Now, this is part of a new section to the magic of Java, called The Real Magic of Java. In this new section, I'm going to focus on real people performing what they believe to be real magic in Java. I'll attempt to explain some of the elements of this Javanese magic, particularly what I describe as the Kajawan elements. However, I need to warn you that inevitably my explanations will be partial. Maybe sometimes some elements of what I say will be incorrect, for which I profusely apologise. But this reflects the oral tradition of magic in Java, the mystery, and at times, I have to admit, subterfuge surrounding the practice of magic in Java. Please accept my apologies, but I do hope you enjoy this new section. Now, definitions, you know, there's plenty on YouTube. If you want to look at it, there's plenty on YouTube about narcissists. Indeed, to a large degree, it's become an industry in its own right. So, you know, if you want to go into this fuller, and there's all sorts of types of narcissists, psychopaths, etc. You know, if you want to go into it, you know, there's just loads of people talking about it, and I'm not trying to compete with them at all. So look into it. But you know, I always talk about your first lesson in economics at school where they define it as everything, but I probably do need to provide something of a definition. So in psychology, there's the concept of the dark triad, which comprises of the personality traits of narcissism, Machiavellianism and psychopathy. And they're called dark because of their malevolent qualities. Narcissists are generally characterised by grandiosity, pride, egotism and a lack of empathy. Psychopathy is characterised by continuous antisocial behaviour, impulsivity, selfishness, callous, unemotional traits and remorselessness, whereas Machiavellianism is characterised by manipulation and exploitation of others, an absence of morality, unemotional callousness and a higher level of self-interest. Generally speaking, narcissism is seen as a personality order and cannot be treated, well, you know, they can use cognitive behavioural therapy, but generally speaking, it can't actually be treated. And indeed, there are many people, including, I think, my guru, Parkano, who argue that they will never change. And, if you do use cognitive behavioural therapy, they're so clever that they'll probably manage to convince you they've changed and not change at all, because that is their personality. Normally, psychopathy, or at least what is called antisocial personality disorder and dissocial personality disorder, so ASPD and DPD, at least these, which are associated with psychopathy, are something which can be identified and therefore treated by a psychiatrist. And that's because they have a greater genetic component. Psychopathy itself is moderately rare, about 1% of the population, in fact the same as empaths, but could be as high as 25% of business leaders and prisoners. And I have in the past argued probably 25% of magicians, and I say somewhat facetiously, but maybe not, 100% of black magicians. And narcissism is believed to develop as a response to a childhood family trauma, such as neglect. I mean, it could be many things, it could be sexual abuse, it could be something relatively minor, or seemingly relatively minor, but nevertheless caused a trauma at a critical time. It's believed to occur quite early on, probably below the age of 3, but not necessarily. It could happen much later. And strangely enough, it's this trauma that is seen to be the same origin as as the creation of empaths. It's just that the response in the child is different, which is why both empaths and narcissists are seen to be on the same scale. Now, narcissists are more common within the general population, maybe 8%. But you can add another 10% if you add on a narcissistic personality disorder, so maybe as much as 18%. And now this does differ by country. It differs by age, it differs by gender, and the reason is, of course, it's largely a societal response. Very worryingly, it appears to be growing exponentially. And maybe 35% of the under 25s are seemingly narcissistic. I just throw out the question, is this a response to social media? Psychopathy and narcissism in society. Now, I've just mentioned social media, and could it be responsible for creating more narcissists? So, things like Facebook, things like YouTube and its comments. You know how everything's got these likes and dislikes. And, we're sort of creating the need for people to get these likes and dislikes, this sort of social approval. Seems to me that would be creating psychopathy. Or narcissism at the very least. Oh, what about those bloody sticks that people carry around to take selfies? Instagram. I mean, come on, 20 years ago, who would have believed that anybody would want to look at pictures of somebody else on their phone? That society's going mad, isn't it? It really is. So yeah, I would argue that social media is creating it. And I mean, this is the most frightening. If you post, I mean, I don't use Facebook and most social media. I don't use. I'm very mistrustful of it. I'm very mistrustful of its origins, who's paying for it, and why they're paying for it. But obviously I use YouTube because I'm a creator, and I every so often get wrapped up in arguments on YouTube. And slowly, I began to realise that actually some of the people may, and a lot of people on YouTube have recognised this, and well, I'll come to that later, but a lot of people have recognised this, that the people posting them, the most provocative comments, are working for somebody, and often they're working either directly or indirectly for a security service. So there's something rather unsavoury about it. Now you're saying, well, why would a security service be doing that? And again, it's more or less public record that, the black ops type of thing that security services get up to. I was going to say in overseas countries, but I mean, there's recent evidence of them doing it in their own countries. And they do it to destabilise society and the population. And you might say, well, why on earth are they doing that? Well, certainly I can see it with overseas powers. I'm not too certain with doing it in your own country. But with overseas powers, then they don't really care about pursuing this line or another. So in the olden days, 10 years ago, they would have paid off if they wanted to depose a leader or something, they'd have paid opposition groups, and supported the opposition groups. But now they'll just support anybody because the chaos it creates actually serves its purpose. And as I say, this seems to be happening amongst seemingly friendly nations. And it also seems to be happening, it does seem that some services are doing it against their own citizens. Now, I have my views about that, but this isn't the place to keep on about it. But having told you that, it gets worse, because once you start arguing with them, in the end you realise that some of the worst offenders aren't actual contractors, aren't people, but they're bots. They're AI bots. Now, I'm not saying that all of these AI bots have been put out there by security services. They may just be bots that are put out there to be trained on to have human-like responses. They might not be more than that. But certainly some of these bots have picked up the ability to argue in a very hard-line Islamic way, verging on the sorts of opinions that I would suggest would be close to promoting terrorism. Now, when I've called out these bots, sometimes somebody rather nicely has contacted me and saying, how did I know? Because, of course, the more you argue with these bots, the more you're training them. But if I'm going around calling them out, then their programmers will want to know how I did it. Now, I have my suspicions who's behind those Islamic bots, and believe me, it's not who you'd think. But that's just my opinion. But the whole thing just shows you, doesn't it, how psychopathy has really taken over society, hasn't it? It feels like our every institution's way of thinking have been overtaken by psychopathy and narcissism, that everything now is unreal, is image rather than substance. That there's no concept of truth anymore, let alone the goal or an aspiration of truth. That we can't trust the media at all anymore. And if we look at our regulations, our laws, our working environment, our business and social relations, all seems to be based on very normative ideas that man needs to be defended from himself. That cruelty, self-interest and greed are somehow normal. That we're all looking to backstab each other. And to my mind, this is the opposite of God intended. God provided us with plenty, with an abundance, to live in love and peace. So why do some people have to hoard God's gifts? If he gave us abundance, why do some people need need more of it than their needs, because God will always supply their needs. Why do some believe that greed is good, when it feels to me like an antisocial disease? What am I saying? Am I saying psychopaths and narcissists are evil? Am I saying that psychopaths and narcissists are under the influence of Satan? Well, those of you who listen to me will know I'm quite guarded about using the words evil and Satan. And, you know, I will later at least explain in part why I feel that way. Now, I want to introduce you to my concept of avatars. Now, yes, I was joking when I said 100% of black musicians are psychopaths and narcissists, but only somewhat. So if we think of my definition of black magic, it's about imposing your will on another. I understand that this could include business and social relationships, and that is deliberate on my behalf. But how does the will of others get imposed on some? How does it actually happen? Well, maybe some of us willingly allow ourselves to be dominated by the views of others. That some people become avatars, not thinking, simply following another's wills. Other names for this that I've come across are meat golem or moral automata. Certainly all of us will have experienced a time when a complete stranger maybe shouts at us or even hits us for no apparent reason. You know, maybe you were sitting waiting for a bus and somebody runs up to you and starts screaming at you and slaps you. I think it's happened to all of us at some time in our lives, and you just pass them, you know, write them off as nutters. But could these simply be people who are picking up on a negative energy that might be surrounding you? Maybe it's been sent by black magic even, but without the will themselves to prevent themselves from not getting wrapped up in it. And I think this is far more common. Of course, you know, a good many don't start shouting at you and run up to you and slap you, but a good many may hold very negative views towards you without really knowing why, without knowing you. You only have to think of jealousy in the evil eye, you know. There's an awful lot of celebrities that people are incredibly jealous over. But why? They don't really know them at all. So, you know, this might be incredibly common, what I'm describing. And would this include people who believe that greed is good and therefore glorify their own greed and the greed of others? What about people who believe that some races are inferior? Maybe though some of these people even take part in the modern slave trade, or worse still, genocide. Might this idea of avatar be a useful description of how many Germans responded during the Nazi period? You know, you've all heard this, I was only doing my job, but you know, it seems to me that if people are under the will of others, that maybe, is it a valid excuse? I mean, well, we'll come to that later, but do you know, so many people went along with it, There has to be more to it than meets the eye, and maybe this idea of avatars goes some way to explaining it. But could it describe how most of us, the state that most of us are in for most of the time, Could it be that we willingly give away our free will to others at times in our lives, maybe most of the times of our lives? Certainly I've done it. I've done it, I know. You may have also heard me say that only God has the right to judge, including the severity and the right, therefore, to punish. This is because, however seemingly serious the crime, be it genocide or, well, you can't get much more serious than that, can you? But whatever the crime, only God really knows the intention and the motivation. Man doesn't know, cannot know. And if these avatars, yes, they've given away their free will, but once they've given away their free will, then they're acting under the will of others. So really, they cannot be judged or punished because, a entity without free will is just acting on fate. It doesn't deserve judgment or punishment. Yes, they can be punished for having given away their free will. And I think that's the important point, that they gave away their free will. But the subsequent crimes they commit after that, they're doing in a complete vacuum because they've already given away their free will. Now, some of you will have already heard me say that I somewhat follow. I've got to say, when it comes to karma, reincarnation, these are things that I've got somewhat complex views on. And sometimes I speak just like there absolutely is karma and reincarnation, just for ease of understanding. But I suppose my views are quite close to those of Swedenborg. And that on the day of judgment, now do I believe there's a day of judgment? Well, I don't believe there's time, but do you know what I mean? That at some point we will be judged. That we actually judge ourselves. And now I don't mean that God plays no part. I think he shines a spotlight on us and we know we can't lie. We know we can't get away with anything. But the actual, confession and the punishment, we determine ourselves. Because what God will do is we will shine a light on those beliefs, such as greed is good, that we thought justified our actions. And the light will be so bright that they will just fade away. And we'll have nowhere to hide. We can't hide behind things like races are different or, whatever it will be, whatever our justifications, because they will seem just stupid in the face of this spotlight. Now, also in common with Swedenborg, I believe, or to a certain degree, I think it's a very useful metaphor at the very least, that we create heaven and hell on this earth. And now I wonder if psychopaths and narcissists could be those who've decided for themselves to place themselves back on earth in a hell of their own creation. Because you see, psychopaths and narcissists can never be satisfied nor happy. In fact, they actually hate themselves. That is the reason for their behaviour. And I've said it before, but it's always worth repeating this. The greed is insatiable. So the Romans used to say that money, it's like drinking salt water to quench your thirst. That once you have money, all you want is more. More and more and more. And this is how psychopaths and narcissists are. They're almost like vampires, that they have to feed. It can be pleasure, but pleasure or misery of others on a regular basis. They have to create this energy and they have to feed on it in others. And all too often they create chaos So it becomes the misery of others. So like a vampire, they can never be happy because of, it's just this impulse to feed and to feed. Now, of course, it's difficult to identify those who are merely avatars and those that are actually imposing their will. So, you know, even psychopaths, well, in fact, especially psychopaths and narcissists, I believe, come under the will of others. And they just follow things. They just follow things without thinking, you know. And particularly if they are like vampires and they have to feed, then that really is, they just give in to these impulses. But who do we know? Who do we know where the real will is coming from? Which is, I suppose, where, you know, this idea of Satan comes from. But I'm not sure about it at all. But where do we know whether the real will is located and the others are just followers? And also, do we know that this doesn't change over time? Could it be that at times some are following the will of others and at other times they're expressing their will? I don't have answers for that. I'm just posing questions. But could it be, now we're going to introduce karma again. So could it be that psychopaths and narcissists coming back to this earth are simply fulfilling their own karma? Or could it go further? Maybe it's to do with your karma and the karma of 7 generations of your ancestors. So the word, why I chose the word avatar is it is like being in a game. And that is, these are characters or avatars in a game that are placed there for you to learn something. And, you know, I used to play with my son's sort of games on Playboy it was. And it used to have these sort of knights, you know, with Osbidian swords and things like this, you know. And there was always these sort of monsters that you had to overcome. But their only purpose was that so you'd learn to do certain things, certain skills you'd develop. That was their only purpose, because once you defeated them, they seemed like nothing. And I wonder if psychopaths and narcissists, that's their real purpose. For us to learn something, for us to learn these lessons of karma. And where I'm coming from on that is, when I asked the ghost of my father about people in my life, my mum, my ex-partner, my son even, he said to me, they're simply playing roles. They're simply playing roles. Almost as though we all play out those roles at different times, not necessarily in a single lifetime, but you know, across our lifetimes, we all play out these roles. But if we are playing out these roles, again, isn't this hell? Isn't this hell? Well, I really hope you've enjoyed this. Because these are real events, I can't say how regularly I'm going to be adding to this subsection. You know, because I don't know how often they're going to occur. But I would imagine that they'll be at least every couple of months, maybe monthly. Now, if you'd like to know when that's going to be, please subscribe and hit the button, and you'll get information on when new ones are released. I'd love you to make comments and ask questions, and if you do, I'll attempt to answer them as honestly as I can. I promise you that there's no attempt on this channel or this part of this channel of me. There'll be no attempt by me at any type of subterfuge. I'll try to be as honest and open as I possibly can be. Inevitably, there will be some of you who disagree with my interpretation, and, we can agree to disagree. But what you're seeing is real stuff here. What I'd love you to do, if you enjoyed this, is look at my other sections. Particularly, I've written novels about magic in Java, and they contain much more information in them, especially me trying to understand the theories of magic, the psychology of it, and I try and intersperse them with a sort of spiritual dimension. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and God bless you.